Alaska, winter 2025. The sky is a thick gray, the wind howling through the snow-covered mountains. In that vast expanse, a man walks slowly along a thin icy path leading to a lake. Each breath he takes turns to white mist, dissolving into the cold fog. In his hand, he holds a worn leather football, its Lombardi logo faded with time. He is Larry Csonka, the legend of the Miami Dolphins, the heart of the only undefeated team in NFL history. A man who twice hoisted the Super Bowl trophy, once named MVP of Super Bowl V8, after carrying the ball 33 times through the steel defense of the Minnesota Vikings. Throughout his career, he embodied the American work ethic, resilient, humble, enduring like the earth itself. In 1987, his name was etched into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. His number 39 jersey hangs forever in Miami, a reminder that there was once a Zonk who turned every collision into a hymn of willpower. He ran through fear, bled, broke his nose, cracked bones, but never backed down. To Americans, he remains one of the purest symbols of sport, a man of few words, answering only with action, by falling and rising again. But glory comes at a cost. After thousands of collisions, Larry's body is now a map of scars. His spine is stiff, his knees creak every morning. He limps around a small wooden cabin by Lake Wasilla, back hunched, trembling hands still clutching the old football, as if letting go would mean losing himself. Inside the cabin, the walls are covered with photos of teammates, youthful faces from the past. Jim Kick, Mercury Morris, Don Shula. Many are gone now, or no longer recognize him in their final meetings. Sometimes, Larry quietly turns on the radio, listening to old Super Bowl commentary. Zonk carries for the 33rd time 6 more yards. Then he switches it off, and the room falls silent. The wind rattles the windows, and he murmurs, his voice hoarse like the wind. My whole life, I ran without stopping. Now my final opponent is silence itself. Each morning, he steps onto the porch, gazing at the frozen lake reflecting a face that once made all of America cheer. The biting cold seeps through his coat, but he stands still, taking a deep breath as if to remind himself he's still alive. And in that moment, amidst Alaska's fog, Larry Csonka, the hero of a golden era, begins another battle. With no audience, no stadium lights, only old age, pain, and the will of a warrior who never learned to surrender. Stowe, Ohio, the 1950s. The land turned bitter cold each winter, fields blanketed in white frost, wind whistling through rusted tin roofs. In a small house on the edge of town, 6 children grew up to the sound of roosters and the acrid breath of a coal stove, raised by a stern Hungarian father and a mother who toiled through 3 shifts daily at a garment factory. His father, Joseph Csonka, wasn't a man of embraces. He taught his children with silence and short, commanding words. Love means helping them stand. His mother, Mildred, rarely spoke of exhaustion. She just bent down, patched her children's clothes, and returned to work. In that world, Larry Csonka learned to grow up through hands and feet, not words. The lanky blond boy rose at 4 in the morning, leading horses to the fields, plowing through frozen earth, sometimes sprawling in the snow. His father watched, never rushing to help, only whispering, "Don't stay down, the ground's cold." And the boy understood, weakness wasn't allowed to exist. While classmates talked about toys, Larry thought of dry firewood and food for winter. When others hid indoors during blizzards, he dragged a wooden cart through foggy fields, nose bleeding from the cold, hands numb and purple. But from that hardship, something else took root, a steely resolve only cold earth could nurture. Stowe Monroe Falls High School wasn't a place for romantic dreams. Larry played defense, head against head, shoulder against shoulder. Every practice was a battle, and the harder he was hit, the more he grinned. He wasn't the fastest or the most skilled, but he was the one who never gave up. When teammates faltered, Larry charged forward, as if each fall was a promise to himself. His coach often said, "Csonka doesn't know fear, only pain." And that pain became the fire warming the long winters of his childhood. Then Syracuse University called, a small scholarship, a chance to escape the poor farm. He left Ohio with a cheap suitcase, carrying the smell of mud, grass, and his father's parting words on the porch. Don't let anyone knock you off your path. At Syracuse, Larry was tested like never before. In his first practice, a collision broke his nose. Blood stained the snow red, and the coach ran over, asking, "Want to sit it out, Csonka?" He just pressed his lips together, grinning through the blood. "At least I'm still running." From then on, the name Csonka, the one who doesn't fall, spread through the team. Larry's college life had no parties, no fanfare. He studied, worked night security, to send money home. Every night, he stood outside the library, watching snow fall, and thinking of Ohio's fields, where his father likely stayed up stoking the fire. Sometimes, he felt like those fields, tough on the outside, but beneath lay a long winter of solitude. Injuries piled up, broken nose, bruised shoulders, cracked ribs, but he never complained. He saw them as medals of endurance. Each morning, as the sun rose behind the dorms, Larry ran through thick snow, breath steaming, heart pounding like a drum. Once when winds tore the practice field's flags to shreds, the coach asked, "Csonka, you ever get scared?" He answered curtly, "Only when I have to stop." That silence wasn't pride but survival instinct, the instinct of a boy raised on cold land, knowing only forward steps kept warmth alive. And when winter passed, the Larry Csonka of Syracuse was no longer the farm boy. He became a man who learned a simple brutal lesson in this world: those who endure in silence survive. Spring 1968, Larry Csonka stepped into the world of Giants. The Miami Dolphins picked him in the 8th round of the NFL draft. The farm boy found himself under hundreds of camera lenses, in a crisp New Jersey, but inside, he was still the kid trembling in Ohio's winds. In Florida, he struggled with the glaring sun, the beach sand, the pressure of a team starving for wins. He knew one thing: run straight, charge in, and never stop. In his rookie season, fate tested him cruelly. A hard hit slammed his head to the turf, a ringing in his ears. Diagnosis: concussion. Weeks later, another blow ruptured his eardrum. Broken nose, blood flowing, face swollen, yet he returned to practice with a white bandage around his head. Don Shula, the coach notorious for iron discipline, watched and said softly, "I've never seen anyone as tough as you." That comment, half praise, half pity, marked the start of their bond, a strict teacher and a student who never quit. Csonka knew football wasn't for the faint-hearted. Each practice brought dozens of blows to his chest, shoulders, head. His body became a map of bruises, but to him, pain was part of the ritual. He didn't chase fame, he wanted to prove endurance could forge glory. As the Dolphins built a power-based game, Larry became its heart. With Jim Keatkick and Mercury Morris, he formed the NFL's most feared running trio. They didn't glide, they crushed. Every yard gained was blood and flesh. In Miami, people didn't see flashiness, they saw resilience. Amid the thunderous collisions, Larry became the symbol of primal football, raw, real, and ruthless. In 1972, the Dolphins made history. 17 straight wins, the only perfect season. Larry carried over 1,000 yards, feet bleeding, knees wrapped, yet he charged as if facing not men but fate. In Super Bowl VIII, he carried 33 times, plowing through Minnesota's defense like an iron freighter in a blizzard. When the game ended, Miami won, and his name rang out like a trumpet: Larry Csonka, most valuable player. His face was chapped from cold, hands bloodied, nose still bandaged. He smiled, the quiet smile of a man who won a war, but knew he'd lost part of his body for it. After the trophy ceremony, Larry skipped the celebration. He sat alone in the locker room, a bloodied towel over his shoulder, yellow light casting shadows on his weary eyes. Outside, the crowd roared. Inside, only heavy breaths and dripping water from the shower. "They don't see," he thought. "Victory smells like blood." Those words never made the papers, but those who saw him that night remember his eyes, the eyes of a man who'd walked through hell and still smiled. The seasons that followed brought more glory, contracts, fame, praise. They came at once, but his body began to betray him. At night he heard his bones creak like dry wood. His right hand lost feeling, his left leg ached in the cold. Standing from bed sent sharp pain down his spine. Teammates laughed, Zonk doesn't tire, but only he knew, in silence, his body was breaking like an old helmet. In 1973, the Dolphins won again. As cameras turned to him, Larry still smiled, still raised the trophy, but his eyes drifted, joy mixed with an emptiness he couldn't name, perhaps because he knew no victory would be greater, and each step forward would hurt more than the last. Those mornings after, he trained alone, looking at his calloused hands, wondering, how much more of my body must I trade to keep this? At 30, he'd reached the world's peak but began his own descent. Each game, fans chanted his name, and he smiled, knowing he was crumbling beneath the armor. Csonka didn't fear hits, he feared the moment he'd no longer hear the collisions, because when silence came, part of that warrior's soul would stop breathing. And from that pinnacle, Larry Csonka's physical tragedy began, quiet, merciless, without fanfare, just the wind whistling through empty bleachers when the lights went out. 1975, after 2 championships, Larry Csonka stood at a crossroads that all of America was talking about. He left the Miami Dolphins, the team that made him a legend, to sign a $1 million contract with the Memphis Southmen of the World Football League. The media called it a golden gamble, but he only said quietly, "I've sweated my whole life. This time, I just want to be free." At 29, with 2 Super Bowl rings, he thought money could buy back the peaceful years his youth never had. But that new world didn't smell of green grass, it reeked of the cold metal of burning dollars. The WFL, born in glory and dying in debt, collapsed after 1 season, paychecks stopped, contracts vanished like smoke. Larry watched the team disintegrate, teammates scattering, and in his eyes was the image of himself, the man who once ran through walls of men, now unable to escape the walls of fame. When he returned to the NFL, no one called him a hero anymore. He signed with the New York Giants, a struggling team, and his body was no longer whole. His knees ached, his shoulders were loose, every morning requiring an ice bath just to move. The New York press wasn't kind. A washed-up mascot, they wrote. Csonka, a relic of the last decade. Each word cut like a knife into the pride of a once invincible man. But he didn't argue, didn't complain, he just trained quietly, trying to make his legs carry him through one more season, knowing no miracles waited ahead. Manhattan never slept. Skyscrapers glowed over streams of cars, and in a small 23-floor apartment, Larry sat alone before a TV screen. A Miami Dolphins game was replaying. The familiar aqua jerseys, the vibrant field, the announcer naming men he once called brothers. But among those names, Csonka was gone. He stared at the screen for a long time, then muted it. Flickering light danced on his rapidly aging face, his eyes empty. "I hear the cheers," he whispered, "but I'm on the outside." In that moment, he understood nothing was lonelier than watching your own past without being allowed to step back in. On the Giants' practice field, he still tried to run, but each step sent pain slicing through his calves. People told him to retire, but a part of him, the part that survived Ohio's cold, that grinned through blood and snow at Syracuse, refused to yield. He swallowed the pain, forced a smile for younger teammates, taught them how to block, how to hold the ball. But in the locker room, he sat for hours in silence, icing his knees, staring at the floor. His body was crumbling, his spirit caught between 2 worlds, a golden past and a gray present. In the New York winter, Larry walked alone down Fifth Avenue, dark coat on, collar up, head bowed. No one recognized him. No one remembered the man who once made a nation roar. The cold wind cut through his chest, and he stopped before a store window displaying TVs replaying Miami's victory celebration. Familiar faces danced in fireworks glow, and he, once the leader of that army, was now just a spectator. In that moment, something in him broke, not a bone, but the dignity of a warrior, abandoned by his past. At 30, Larry Csonka saw what many learn only in a lifetime: glory belongs to no one. It comes like a storm, then leaves like the wind, leaving those at its center with empty hands. When the season ended, he left the Giants quietly. No press conference, no tears, just a small suitcase, a battered body, and a strange emptiness. On his last night in Manhattan, Larry sat on a hotel balcony, looking down at the lit-up traffic. Horns blended with the wind, and he realized No one clapped for him anymore, no field called his name. In a corner bar, people still talked about the Super Bowl, about new stars, while he, once the center of that universe, was now a shadow. In his journal, he wrote a few lines. Success smells like metal, it's cold, shiny, and never enough. That was the moment Larry Csonka touched the rawest truth of sports, where money can buy everything except the soul of a man who bled for it. And as he left New York, winter closed, the papers ran a brief note: Csonka leaves Giants, future uncertain. No one knew the man was on a flight back south, staring out the window, wind whipping the glass, with one fear in his heart, that the world had moved on, leaving him trapped in the echo of old cheers. 1979, when it seemed Larry Csonka's name had faded into obscurity, the man returned to where it all began, the Miami Dolphins. The team had changed, younger faces, a modernized facility, bigger stands, but to Larry, it still smelled of memory, sweat, wet grass, and the sea breeze from South Florida. The day he stepped onto the field in the familiar aqua jersey, the Orange Bowl crowd stood, chanting "Zonk, Zonk," like a song from a distant time. They called it a miracle, the old hero back, the old flame reignited. But only he knew the miracle came at the cost of pain, with a body at half strength. Each morning, stepping out of bed, he gripped the wall to avoid falling. Each time he laced his boots, his knees screeched like breaking steel. Every yard on the field was a new crack in his bones, a defiance of God. Pain was my coach, he said, the only coach I couldn't fire. Coach Shula, now gray-haired, watched Larry run and said quietly to an assistant, "If anyone can come back from hell, it's him." And indeed Csonka returned like a man from ashes, not for glory, but to prove he still existed. In the 837 yards of that season, each run carried its own sound, the groan of muscles, the crack of joints, the defiant beat of his heart. Teammates said that sometimes, after games, he sat alone in a locker room corner, eyes closed, hands on his knees, sweat mixing with blood. A young player once asked, "How do you still do it?" Larry just smiled, a smile without flash or victory, only the exhaustion of a man who'd reached the end. "Because I don't know how to stop." That fall, Miami played its final home game, sunlight golden like wine. Csonka took the field to thunderous applause. He didn't run as fast as before, didn't plow through like in 1972, but each step choked the crowd with emotion. In the third quarter's final minute, he took the ball, charging straight into the defense, a collision like thunder. When the dust settled, he stood, head bowed, ball in hand, the stands erupting. That was the last time they saw Zonk in the full image of a warrior. After the game, he was named Comeback Player of the Year, a reward for a man reborn in pain. But to Larry, that glory tasted bitter. That night, as the team celebrated, he slipped away. In the steam room, dim light, vapor thick in the air, he sat alone. Water ran down his shoulders, over crisscrossed scars, cracks and stitches, a map of a life of labor and sacrifice. He looked at his broad hands, hands that broke defenses, lifted trophies, now trembling faintly, no longer obeying. He closed his eyes, wondering had he paid too much to stand here again. The sound of dripping water echoed in the empty room, like rain on the Ohio roof of his childhood. In the hiss of steam, he whispered, unheard, only the wet walls echoing his voice. "I won, but I traded everything." After that season, Larry decided to leave the field forever. He walked out of Miami's tunnel, looking at the stands where kids cheered his name, and smiled. Not a victor's smile, but that of a man who knew he was spent. As he removed his helmet for the last time, sweat fell, mingling with a tear he tried to hide. No more cheers, only his heartbeat and sunlight glinting off the gray hairs under his helmet. That evening, he drove alone along the coast, window down, salty wind on his face. In the distance, sea and sky merged, as if the world was closing a chapter. On the passenger seat was the old football, taped up, its Dolphins paint faded. He touched it lightly, the rough leather stinging his heart. Everything most precious, teammates, fans, youth, lay behind him. But in that moment, Larry realized, sometimes the greatest victory isn't being cheered, but knowing you're brave enough to let go. The spotlight flared one last time before the lights went out. The hero returned, then left, not with trumpets or fireworks, but in the silence of a Florida evening, where the sun sank into the sea, and an aging legend softly said goodbye to the field that made and broke his life. After closing his final season, Larry Csonka vanished from the gridiron, like a man stepping out of a war. No grand press conference, no tears for the cameras. He quietly packed his suitcase, drove his old truck north. The farther from the spotlight, the easier he could breathe. Florida's blazing sun had given him glory, but taken nearly all his strength. He wanted a place where no one shouted his name, where there was only wind and earth. So he went to Alaska. In that cold, wild land, he met Audrey Bradshaw, a quiet, strong, serene woman, like a stream flowing through ice. They became companions, building a home, fishing, filming the first episodes of the TV show North to Alaska, a journey of two people seeking silence in a world where fame had grown too loud. Alaska was harsh, but honest. Each morning, Larry woke to skin-cutting cold, hearing wolves howl in the distance, and realized something in their cries was like him, solitary, resilient, still surviving. He learned to navigate icy waters, read the wind, hunt in snow. His body was weak, but his soul felt freer than ever. The man once swallowed by stadium lights now lived in the soft gray glow of the northern sun, where day and night blurred. Audrey said, "Here you don't need to prove anything anymore." He smiled, replying, "Here I can lose and still be forgiven." But Alaska wasn't just peace. It tested the line between life and death. In the fall of 2005, Larry and the film crew embarked on a dangerous journey to the Bering Sea to capture migrating caribou. The sky turned stormy, the sea black as oil, but he said, "We can make it, just be careful." No one expected it would be the most defining trip of his life. A few miles out, the wind shifted, clouds dropped, waves rose like walls of water. The boat's lights flickered, then died. A small explosion sounded, the engine was gone. The group was swept into a Bering Sea storm, wind screaming at 70 miles an hour, waves towering like 5-story buildings. Larry gripped the helm, icy water lashing his face, metal creaking, the boat rocking like a toy. Wind, waves, and human cries merged into a symphony of panic. He shouted, "Hold on, don't let go." When a massive wave hit, the boat nearly capsized. Everything went black. In that moment, he thought his life was over. "I knew I could die, and no one would know," he later recounted. No stands, no lights, just darkness and waves roaring like breaking bones. Time crawled agonizingly. 10 hours passed in the icy sea, wrapped in plastic tarps, shivering, waiting for a miracle. When the Coast Guard helicopter appeared, its spotlight cutting through the rain, Larry wept. They were rescued, pulled up one by one, heavy and exhausted. But back on land, the real haunting began. The first night after the storm, Larry couldn't sleep. Each gust against the roof sounded like waves. Each raindrop felt like sinking. Audrey said he jolted awake at night, drenched in sweat, eyes wide, silent. He didn't fear death. He feared surviving. That survival gnawed at him, as if he'd taken something from someone else. One evening, Audrey entered the living room, finding Larry by the fireplace, flames casting light on his wind-worn face. He didn't look at her, only at the fire, eyes empty. His broad hands trembled, shielding his face, tears silently falling, blending with the orange glow. He cried, not from fear, but because surviving made him feel small, weaker than losing a game. "I've won so many times," he whispered, "but this time I was only spared." In the years that followed, Larry spoke less. He spent most of his time in the forests, by the sea, with the Alaskans he met on his journeys. He shared football stories, but his voice always paused at a point where he remembered that storm. "If the helicopter hadn't come, I'd never see another sunrise." Sometimes, he went to the lake alone, listening to wolves howl in the long night. In their sound, he saw himself, a survivor searching for the meaning of being alive. Alaska gave him what the NFL never did: silence. But that silence wasn't peace. It was acceptance, a necessary solitude. He lived quietly, fished, wrote a few journal entries, filmed a few TV episodes, then vanished back into the woods. Neighbors said Csonka's still strong, but his eyes have something distant, like he's seeing what others can't. Sometimes, in Alaska's long nights, Larry sat by the fire, hearing wind rattle the wooden walls, recalling his life from Ohio's poor farm, Miami's blazing fields, to the Bering Sea storm. It was like a reel of hazy film. He had no regrets, but his eyes held the sorrow of a man who knew every victory came at a cost. The storm passed, he said in an interview, but the sound of waves never stops in my head. In that silence, Larry Csonka was no longer the Miami star, no longer Zonk, the unyielding icon of the 70s. He was just a man who'd endured too many collisions, sitting by a fire, breathing softly, hearing in the wolves' howls a song for survivors, souls carrying both pain and gratitude, for still seeing the next dawn. Time passed like snow piling on the Wasilla cabin's roof, silent, slow, and no one knew when it would grow heavy enough to collapse. After the Bering Sea storm, Larry became more reclusive, but the silence didn't last forever, as news of old teammates trickled in, each like a new crack in his worn armor. Jim Kick, his close teammate, who shared every yard in the glory years of 1972 to 73, was diagnosed with CTE, brain degeneration from repeated trauma. Mercury Morris, the final piece of the legendary Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids trio, bore neurological scars. They were once unbreakable, men who ran through every wall, now unable to recall the way to their rooms. One fall morning, Larry drove to a nursing home in Fort Lauderdale. On the passenger seat was an old photo of the three of them, arms around each other, beaming under the Dolphins' practice field sun. Entering the room, he saw Jim Kick by the window, eyes distant, lips murmuring wordless sounds. Larry called softly, "Jim, it's me, Zonk." Kick turned, a faint smile flickered, then faded. "Zonk, Zonk," he repeated, like a dim echo of lost memory. Larry sat by the bed, holding his friend's hand, feeling the faint warmth through thin skin. They sat in silence, saying nothing more. In that quiet, an era was fading. That afternoon, Larry sat in the parking lot, still in the truck's cab. On the steering wheel, his broad hands trembled. He didn't cry, but his eyes blurred in the sunlight. "We traded our old age for 20 years of brilliant youth," he said softly, voice hoarse like wind over snow. "And now old age takes revenge with silence." Each time a teammate passed, he opened the old album. Its leather cover was worn, pages yellowed. Each page held a face, a smile, a fearless youth. Some died of heart failure, some from neurological disease, some slipped away forgotten. He turned the pages, fingers brushing photos like touching ghosts. Some nights, he sat alone in the living room, with only an oil lamp and the wind. He looked at the wall, where the 1972 Dolphins team photo hung, and silently counted, 19, gone. Larry never feared death, but forgetting. In rare talks, he'd say, "People celebrate victories, but few remember who bled for them." In a country that worships youth, old warriors like him were mere shadows on trophy room walls, obscured by the glow of new stars. TV replayed old Super Bowl games. Fans cheered the young number 39, but no one knew that man now needed a cane to walk from the living room to the porch. Larry's health weakened. The spine, cracked from 70s collisions, ached daily. Doctors told him to rest, but he still drove to veterans' gatherings when he could. His eyes dimmed, needing thick glasses, but he could still read the small print in his memoir, Head On. Each night, he lay listening to his heartbeat, deep, slow, sometimes skipping. In his mind, it blended with old sounds, the ball hitting his hands, crowds roaring, knees crashing to grass. Those sounds lived only in him now, faint like a past symphony. Audrey stayed by him, caring with the patience of one who knew no one truly heals after living like Larry did. On clear mornings, she wheeled him to the porch, where the breeze carried pine and melting snow. He sat gazing far off, eyes quiet. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He answered softly, "About those who aren't here." Sometimes his voice caught. In his mind, they were still young, laughing, slapping shoulders before games. But now it was just him, aged in a wooden cabin, hearing wolves howl in the forest, as if calling the departed. Some nights, he dreamed of returning to the Orange Bowl, lights blazing, crowds chanting, but looking around, the stands were empty, teammates gone. He ran, searching for them, hearing only his own echo. Zonk, zonk. He woke, cold sweat, heart pounding. He sighed, looking around the quiet room. Silence was no longer a friend, but a barrier between him and the past. In recent years, when asked about the Dolphins' legendary legacy, Larry often smiled. But the smile trembled. We gave America an undefeated season, but the only undefeated thing left might be the longing. He knew time would erase all names, but he didn't resent it. He only hoped that somewhere, on a screen, when someone watched those old games, they'd see a generation's shadow, men who ran with their hearts and fell with smiles. Each night, before turning off the lamp, Larry opened the album, touching the first photo, him Kick Morris, laughing in the sun. He whispered, "I'm still here, don't worry." Then he closed the book, hand on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Outside, wind swept through the pines, carrying distant wolf howls. In the dark, Larry Csonka closed his eyes, hearing nature's song, like a gentle farewell for a generation that lived fully, burned brightly, and now lingered only as faint echoes in the memory of time. 2022, Larry Csonka sat at a small wooden table in his Wasilla, Alaska home, dim light casting shadows on white pages. On the table, a thick notebook bore two simple words on its spine, "Head On." It was the title of the memoir he was writing, a summation of a life spent charging into everything with heart and flesh. Each page, he said, is a scar reopened. Each line, written shakily by a calloused hand, veins bulging, joints swollen with each cold snap. He needed no ghostwriter, no polished editor, he only needed the truth. And Larry Csonka's truth, as he once said, was never easy to hear. Now at 78, his routine no longer revolved around the field or cameras, but around physical therapy, painkillers, and calls from fans who still remembered. Each morning, Audrey prepared coffee, placing it by the stretching mat. He rose stiffly, adjusting his back, following the doctor's prescribed movements. The crackling of his knee joints echoed like memories of the past. He smiled faintly, telling Audrey, "These sounds are better than silence." By afternoon, he sat on the porch, facing snow-capped mountains, pen trembling in hand. He answered fans' letters, his handwriting crooked, ink smudging with his faint breath. Some wrote, "You were my childhood." A 12-year-old sent a drawing of him running, scribbling, "I want to be strong like you." Larry read, chuckled, and said to Audrey, "Bet the kids don't know I need both hands to uncap a pen." But he signed and wrote anyway, because to him, those letters were like the final yards, each thank you a run through exhaustion to reach human connection. Evenings as snow fell, and the fireplace glowed steadily, Larry often sat alone in an old chair, his gaze fixed on a framed photo on the wall. In the wooden frame was a young Audrey in a wool coat, their two young sons laughing, and him, still the giant of the Miami Dolphins. He sat silently for hours, eyes dimming with age, but memories as vivid as yesterday. He recalled every teammate's face, every handshake, every collision, every time he stood after a fall that seemed impossible. "My whole life, I ran head-on into everything," he whispered, "and now I just want to sit still and breathe." Some nights, he couldn't sleep. The wind through the pines outside sounded like the crowds of the 70s, distant, overwhelming, then gone. He stepped onto the porch, snow dusting the steps, cold piercing his chest. Each breath hurt, but he inhaled deeply, as if to hold on to something of this world. Outside was darkness, inside, peace. He knew not everyone got to grow old. Many he loved lay somewhere, in nursing homes, hospitals, or returned to dust. He was among the few still alive, and surviving. Two words that sounded similar, but to him, were as different as two sides of a coin. When ESPN asked in a small interview if he had any regrets, Larry just smiled. "Regrets, sure, but if I could choose again, I'd still run. Only this time, I'd run slower, to see more." He paused, then added, "My life was a series of collisions, but what's left isn't the wounds, it's the will, The young reporter fell silent, unsure whether to write or just listen. At 78, Larry's body was a map of injuries. Crooked spine, arthritic knees, eyes so dim he couldn't read fine print. But his soul remained clear. Each morning, Audrey found him on the porch, writing a few lines for his unfinished memoir, or staring at the frozen lake, reflecting dawn's light. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He answered, soft as the wind, "About the falls I still got up from." The day head-on was finished. Larry signed the first copy himself. The handwriting trembled but was firm. He said, "I don't want people to read it like a sports book. I want them to read it like looking in a mirror, seeing a piece of themselves, even if it's small." When the book launched, there was no grand ceremony, no live broadcast, just a signing at the Anchorage Library, where a few dozen fans lined up in the snow to see him. Larry sat in a gray sweater, face etched with wrinkles, but his smile still kind. A boy came for a signature, asking, "Did it hurt, falling like that?" Larry laughed, looking into the child's eyes. "Sure did, but if it doesn't hurt, you'll never know how strong you are." That night, back home, he placed head-on the shelf beside his old helmet and the faded leather football. The room glowed with firelight. Audrey brought hot tea, and he said softly, "If I don't wake up tomorrow, at least I know I said what needed saying." Audrey took his hand, silent. They sat quietly, hearing only the crackling logs and their hearts beating in slow, steady rhythm, in a peaceful Alaska evening. One early spring morning, Larry went to the backyard, where his 10-year-old grandson, blond like he was in youth, played with a ball. The boy ran, fell, stood, brushed off snow and grinned. Larry called him over, handing him the old worn football. "Its stitches loose. Keep it," he said. "This ball's been through more storms than you'd think." The boy's eyes lit up. Larry knelt, put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't dodge it. Take it head on." Those simple words, like a will from a lifetime, left Audrey, standing at the door, speechless. As the boy ran off, Larry stood watching. The wind nudged his wool cap askew. He adjusted it, smiled, and sat on the wooden chair, hand on his knee, eyes on the lake. Spring light fell on his face, making everything seem brighter, lighter. The deep wrinkles around his eyes looked like cracks in an old statue, but no one called it ugly, for they were proof of time, of endurance. Today Larry Csonka no longer runs, but in Alaska's silence, his voice still echoes, not footsteps, but the resonance of a spirit. America has many heroes, victors, builders, dreamers, but few are brave enough to age gracefully, to accept that the final victory isn't in speed, but in the courage to face fading. And so, as the day's last sunlight stretched across the lake, Larry Csonka's image faded into the mist, the old football resting on the table, the fire still burning. A chapter closed, not with cheers, but with the steady breath of a man who'd been through it all: victory, pain, loss, and finally, peace. If you ever believed that willpower can overcome pain, if the image of a man charging through a defense in a storm once moved you, leave a tribute for Larry Csonka, who ran his final yard with all the strength and kindness a human could carry. Reading Larry Csonka's full story, it's hard not to choke up at the cost of glory and the quiet beauty of a life endured. From the undefeated 17-0 season of 1972 to Super Bowl VIII, where he carried 33 times, 145 yards, and earned MVP with a weathered face and bloodied hands, those aren't just stats, they're the pounding heartbeat of an America that believed in labor and resilience. But after the cheers came the Manhattan night when he silently watched the Dolphins win on TV without his name, after the golden gamble of the WFL turned to ash, after a battered body in a Giants jersey was called a washed-up mascot. Those were moments a hero learned the loneliness of being left behind by his past. The 1979 comeback, 837 yards, 13 TDs, Comeback Player of the Year shone like a final dawn, only for the smoky memory of the 2005 Bering Sea storm, 10 hours awaiting the Coast Guard amid waves like buildings, the sound of breaking metal, the confession, "I could die and no one would know," to etch the fragility of existence. Most heartbreaking was holding Jim Kick's hand as his friend forgot Zonk. Each album page turned was a teammate gone, leading him to say, "We traded our old age for 20 years of brilliant youth." And then 2022, writing head on, each page reopening a scar, finally giving the old ball to his grandson saying, "Don't dodge it, take it head on." For Americans, the lesson is close: honor the silent workers after the fireworks fade. Don't just worship youth but cherish the dignity of age. Seek help and care for the mental health of old warriors from fields to factories. Teach kids to face, not avoid. And as Csonka proved, what remains after every collision isn't the wound, but the will, humanity, and courageous calm to age with honor. If Larry Csonka's resilient journey made you believe humans can overcome any storm with will and kindness, hit subscribe to keep that flame alive with us. Thank you for joining. See you in the next video, where we continue honoring legends who dared to charge into life, head on.